This is a 200 Q&A practice test. Plane of attorney, Mr. Smithton, capital S-M-I-T-H-T-O-N, Mr. Smithton. Defense attorney, Ms. M.S. period Adams, capital A-D-A-M-S. And we'll start with defense attorney. Ready? Do you know what this photo shows? Yes. What is it? It's the front windshield of the motorcycle of vehicle number 1. And what does the writing say on it? Do you know all of the writing? Yes. We've got a cycle gear sticker in the top left corner and the top right corner, a logo in the center top, the words Great Writers in the center of the windscreen, and then 23 on the left lower portion of the windscreen, and what appears to be a 16 on the right lower portion of the windscreen. What does Great Writers stand for? Do you know? Let me object as calling for speculation, lack of foundation. If you know, go ahead. It's a motorcycle group, club. How do you know about them? Let me assume facts not in evidence. Do you know about them? Yes. Oh, go ahead. Enforcement stops in the canyon areas. I've stopped a couple of their riders. Was that before this accident? Yes. And had you ever stopped Mr. Kane? No. To your knowledge? Okay. And when you talk about enforcement stops, what type of, was that for traffic or moving violations? Let me object as relevance. Number of violations. It could be either mechanical violations, such as not having a license plate, or tinted windscreen, or it could also be for speed. I don't recall exactly what the enforcement contacts were. Okay, and do you know whether the Great Writers Motorcycle Club had any other clothing or articles of gear that would identify them as belonging to the club other than the windshield? Yes, they usually wear a black vest with the same logo on the rear portion. Let me object as lack of foundation. Do you know if Mr. Kane was wearing such a vest at the time of the accident? I believe he was. And how do you know that? Well, I don't think he said he knows that. He said he thought he believed he was. Do you know he was? Do you know, as a matter of fact, that he was? I recall a vest being near the scene of the collision. Do you recall Mr. Kane wearing a Great Writers vest at the time of the accident? Yes, you have a memory of that today. I do. Do you remember when I took your deposition last week? Yes. Remember when I asked you about clothing and Mr. Kane and you told me you didn't know? Argumentative. Do you remember that? Yes. Argumentative. Is what you told me last week the truth? Now my recollection is he was wearing a Great Writers. Is that what you told me last week true, officer? At the time it was. Go ahead, ma'am. And it's difficult when you interrupt me, so anyway, for that, so tell me what you remember Mr. Kane wearing. It was a black motorcycle vest with the Great Writers logo on it, and I believe somewhere on it, whether it be the front or the back, it said either vice president or treasurer. And where were you when you saw this? I don't recall, but it was at the scene. And was this vest on Mr. Kane? I don't recall. Okay, let's switch to your mechanical inspection. I'd like to look at those photos, and you can tell me a little more about what you did during your inspection, kind of a step-by-step. Okay, so if you want to pull Exhibit 15, well, you could also use Exhibit 14 if that helps you. Okay, but I think your inspection photos are in Exhibit 15. Okay, all right, so you indicated that you did take these photos that are marked as Exhibit 15, correct? Yes, and how long did your inspection take? A couple hours. That was with Officer Brett. Brett, was he with you the entire time? Yes, and can you walk us through what you checked referring to Exhibit 15 and Exhibit 12, your supplemental narrative report? Yes, I checked the throttle, clutch, steering, suspension system, brake system, tires, and wheels. I also searched for any recalls that the vehicle may have had. What were your findings on the throttle systems? My finding on the throttle system was that the hand grip and the throttle tube, which is the right side of the handlebar, were displaced from the throttle tube housing as a result of the collision. I was still able to use the throttle, or I was still able to rotate the throttle from the fully open to a fully closed position. And when I turned it to the fully open position, if I let go of the throttle tube, the throttle closed. And did that indicate to you there was no mechanical issue with the throttle? Yes. All right, and what about the clutch? The clutch lever was attached to the handlebar. It was found to move freely throughout its range of motion along with the clutch cable. When the clutch lever was released, the clutch engaged and the vehicle was not able to be rolled. We had put it into gear at that point, and then when we pulled in the clutch lever, the vehicle was able to be rolled forward with the transmission still in gear. Okay, and so what was your opinion then after the inspection? It appeared as though the clutch had been operable at the time of the collision. What about the steering? What inspection did you conduct? The handlebars and front forks, which are both parts of the front suspension, were able to be turned to the left to the frame stop. The handlebars were attached to the upper triple clamp, which holds them together. The right side handlebar mount was broken, leaving the throttle assembly and front brake assembly hanging by the throttle cables and brake line, and with that damage, it would not have been able to be operated. You're talking about damage due to the accident, right? Correct. This is all damage due to the accident, right? Correct. Okay, and so it was your opinion that there was no pre-existing damage? Yes. And the damage that was noted was the result of the collision? Yes. That was your conclusion? Correct. Okay, and what about the suspension? What was your inspection? I inspected the front forks and the rear shock. The front suspension was found to be in good condition. The fork tubes compressed with no noticeable binding. There was no evidence of leakage around the fork tubes, and they appeared to be undamaged. The rear swing arm was intact. There was a single coil over shock intact, and there were no noted damage or problems. Okay, and your conclusions is that the steering system was operating correctly at the time of the collision. Okay, and the damage noted was the result of the collision? Yes. Okay, what about the brakes? I removed the brake pads from the brake calipers and I measured them with a micrometer and observed that there was plenty of friction surface left on the brake pads. The front master cylinder tank cap was intact. There was brake fluid within the tank. The front brake lever had adequate resistance when the brakes were applied. The rear brake system was intact and the rear brake lever had adequate resistance when brakes were applied. There were no leaks observed or noted, and it appears that the brakes were working prior to the collision. All damage is as a result of the collision. Okay, are there photos of the inspection of the brakes? Yes, there's pictures of the brake tanks that show that the fluid there was sufficient fluid within the tank to operate the brakes. What photo was that? Starts at photos 3864 and continuing through 3866. Okay, and then inspection of the brake calipers, rotors, and pads begins at picture photo 3872 and continues through 3892. Take a look at 3874, the photo on that page. Okay, what does that show? This shows one of the brake calipers containing the brake pads. And what about 3875? That's the other side of the brake caliper, showing where the brake line attaches to the brake caliper. What about 3876? This shows the right front inner and outer brake pads. And 3877, this shows the right front inner and outer brake pad backings. What about 3878? This shows the profile of the right front outer brake pad so that you can see the thickness of its friction surface. And what about 3879? That's the right profile of the right front inner brake pad so you can see the thickness of its friction surface. And then 3880, this is another brake caliper assembly, probably the left front because we've already touched on the right front. Okay, and then that series of photos through 3892, well, 3885, okay, are those for the left brake? Yes, okay, and kind of a similar exercise as what you did for the right brake, yes. Okay, take a look at photo 3893. Okay, what does that photo show? This is a picture of the rear tire of the motorcycle. Okay, along with the tread pattern and depth. Who placed the orange markings? That was Officer Brett. And why did he do that? He had all of the tools that we were using, and so he showed me how he typically marks a tire. Why did he mark it? So that you could see the rotation, the direction of rotation of the tire, and the orange line is where the DOT line is, the Department of Transportation number, which is on the sidewall. We use that as a reference in case there's any damage to the tire so we can note it and be able to locate it again appropriately. On what photo do you see that DOT? It's not shown on any of the photos. On any of the photos, where would it be if it was indicated? There was no picture that indicates the DOT number on the tires. Where is it typically located on the tire? on the sidewall. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't understand that. What's the significance of understanding the tread pattern and the depth? It's not necessarily the tread pattern. It's more or less the tread depth. If the tires are very worn, when they don't provide sufficient traction in order to accelerate, stop, make turning movements, and they can alter the ability of the person to handle the motorcycle. And were there any conclusions determined as a result of the inspection of the tire, the back tire of the motorcycle? Object, lack of foundation, calls for expert opinion with regard to depth. Yes, what was that? That both the front and the rear tires were very worn and had little tread depth on the top or center section of the tire. Was that for both the front and rear tires? Yes. Is there a photo that shows the front tire depth, tread depth? Yes, it would be photo 3897 and 3898. Do you have an opinion whether the tread depth added in any way to the accident? No. No, it did not. Yes, I do have an opinion, and no, it did not. Okay, and why do you say that? Because the road conditions at the scene of the collision would not necessarily need any tread depth to them. Typically, the tread is there for water, and any road surfaces that are slick need extra traction. Looking at photo 3895, is that the rear tire? All right, the word list. We have great writers, capital G-R-E-A-T, new word, capital R-I-D-E-R-S. Mr. Kane, capital K-A-N-E. Cycle gear, capital C-Y-C-L-E, new word, capital G-E-A-R. Officer Brett, capital O on officer. Brett, capital B-R-E-T-T. Department of Transportation, capital D on department, small o-f, capital T on transportation. Department of Transportation. And then D-O-T is all caps, no periods, no spaces. D-O-T. And that's it for the word list, and that will conclude our 200 Q&A practice test.